They've gone from stealing bikes to stealing lives. So many young hands gripping stainless steel knives. See a kid they don't like, they're messing him up. What's wrong or what's right is giving less of a fuck. Sticking them up, left, right, stitching them up. Everything revolves around getting the cut. Middle fingers up, fisticuffs, pissing it up. Before the pen license, fists in the cuffs. They don't use them to pack shelves, they use them to pack cells. Up in the system before they even crack 12. You can paint a pretty picture using northern pastels, but it's black and white and the latter still sells. What kind of life is that? They're getting born and tagged. Teacher can't reach them, I'm getting fucking bored of that. They couldn't spell the name off the bat. I bet you they can tell you where to score a quarter.
Almost 1 week on from the Kalgoorlie riots, more than 1,000 people have expressed interest in a rally happening here in Perth. The protest is set to begin at 11 a.m. outside the State Library in WA. A social media page calls on the people to rally against the ongoing murder and brutalisation of young people. Joining us now is the rally's organiser, Robert Eggington. Good morning to you, Robert.
Good morning, Tracy.
What is the plan for today's rally?
Well, the rally comes off the back of the unfortunate killing of young Elijah in Kalgoorlie, rest in peace, and it also comes off the back of the Don Dale Royal Commission, which commences tomorrow in the Northern Territory, and it also is about a lot of the brutality, the abuses and the racism which our young people in this country face today.
Robert, we did see violent and chaotic scenes in Kalgoorlie last week. Can you guarantee that today's protest will be peaceful?
Well, look, I think the peaceful process of the rally today would depend entirely on the police presence. I think Kalgoorlie was a matter where a lot of young people, took to the streets following the news of the death of their young mate, their young friend. And I think that, when you look at riots in this country that are well, and have been strategically planned, like the Cronulla riots, well, we're certainly not expecting that type of outcome. We're a dignified, we're a very spiritual, and we're a people of integrity. So, look, the Aboriginal right to protest in a democratic country today will be expressed, and it'll be expressed extremely strong, and it'll be expressed by people of pride and spirit. So, look, I expect today's rally to be peaceful, and I expect it to go along the lines of how we've coordinated it.
What are you hoping to get out of today's rally? A lot of people have expressed interest to attend it today, but what are you hoping to get out of it?
Well, look, I think there's issues that need to be addressed in which the Attorney-General has made in the reference to the young people in Kalgoorlie. You hear the terminology, we're going to hunt them down and, bring them to justice. And this is the type of language that, we once heard from George W. Bush when he was going after, bin Laden, as, we'll hunt them down, smoke them out and bring them to justice. What we're talking about here in Western Australia are little 14, 15, 16-year-old children in Kalgoorlie that was, directly reacting to, again, the news of the death of one of their young people. We're not a people of intent of violence, and certainly not terrorists. So I think the language in which the Attorney-General is using is inciting, a sense of ill response in terms of community and police and Aboriginal relations. And I think Carlo Callaghan, the police commissioner, also needs to be, very aware of the type of language, if you like, and descriptives that he uses when he's talking about our Aboriginal young people. And, if we're going to better race relations in this country, it starts off on the basis of respect. And I think that's what's missing, is a respect in the sense of Aboriginal, people and our right, if you like, in terms of our human rights to be here as peoples.
Yeah, sure. All right, Robert Egginton, we have to leave it there. As you mentioned, we are lucky to live in a country where there is the freedom to have these kinds of protests. All the best, and I hope it is a peaceful one for you all today.
Check it. They'd rather compensate us than give us recognition. In other words, they'd rather buy you out of your tradition. Because when you recognise, that's how our culture survives many millenniums and thousands of tribes around that fire, like corroborate the writings on walls. It's like the truth in the past, they would rather us all dead. But we survivors, through that spirit of my ancestors, thousands of years from behind us, yeah, that's survivors. Through their ignorance and arrogance and miseducation divides us, product of environment. Before all the grogs and the drugs, it was dreams that would guide us. Now we're stuck in violence, prison systems confine us, genocide undercovers the stolen kids under silence. No wonder we tyrant. Revolution is now, and Australia can't stop us, we're taking back what is ours.
Kaya. The gathering of our people today is called Koolonger Budja, our children's land. Today, this ceremonial gathering is overseen spiritually by two strong Yorgers. One who keeps the campfires burning on the east coast, Jenny Munro, and the other from Dumbarton, keeping the campfires burning on the west coast, Selina Eggington. We are in good hands, Ma Mudich. The gathering today is about our human rights to be the voice of our young people. Michael Mission has commenced to lay charges of the young people in Kalgoorlie, who he says started race riots. George W. Bush, when first stated after the attacks on the Trade World Centre, said we'll smoke them out, we'll hunt them down, and we'll bring them to justice. The Attorney General said we'll hunt them down and we'll bring them to justice. Just like you would say against a mob of terrorists.
We acknowledge our Wajak Mort, the traditional owners of this Budja, and we acknowledge all the 13 clan groups that make up the great Bibbulmun Nation. Today's Koolonger Nala Budja rally has been convened by the Dumbarton Aboriginal Corporation as a response to the recent death in Kalgoorlie and to all our young Aboriginal people who have been oppressed. I want to now introduce Jenny Munro, who's come all the way from Sydney, flew in this morning. And Jenny's come to show the solidarity of the Koori people with us here today.
They're allowed to get away with murder of black people every day in this country. They're allowed to do it. The system says it's okay. How the media portrays us in such a negative light, how the courts are even worse when they hand out those judgments. And then it goes to corrective services. That's the end of the line, not the start. Racism is embedded in this country. It's the very bedrock that white Australia survives on. The bedrock of their survival for 230 years. They have a sickness. It's a serious mental health problem.
May everything be lifted that ties us down from speaking. All the negative words that put on our mouth from speaking the truth about what's happening in our community be taken off us right now. Because we need to stand and talk. Young people need to rise up. Our elders fought too much for us. They sacrificed too much for us. Our elders went through so much pain, and now we must unite and stand together. All black people, stand together. Together we must stand and lead, so there's coming next generations behind us. And if we're not ready, more and more of this is going to happen.
There's been a huge police turnout at a protest in the city following the death of Elijah Doughty. The demonstration was peaceful, but it comes 1 week after the schoolboy was killed near Kalgoorlie, sparking a race riot.
On horseback, on bikes and on foot, police were taking no chances.
Perth is the most racist city in the most racist country in the world.
500 protesters gathered in Northbridge rallying for Indigenous rights and justice for Elijah Doughty.
We're coming for justice. Justice for Elijah.
We must unite and stand together. All black people, stand together.
It's been 1 week since the death of the 14-year-old Kalgoorlie schoolboy, allegedly run over and killed by a white man. His death sparking a race riot in the country town after the 55-year-old man was charged with manslaughter. Today, protesters stood for a minute's silence in memory of the 14-year-old. The teenager's funeral will be held next week. Rebecca Johns, 9 News.
What we are talking about here is the death of a child. It was not a manslaughter, it was a murder of a child. The DPP charged that guy with manslaughter. That guy premeditated a murder against a child. He left the road, went into bushland and murdered a child, ran straight over the top of him like he was nothing. We are the poorest people in our own country.
Protesters have gathered in the city over the death of 14-year-old Kalgoorlie boy Elijah Doughty. Speakers pushed for Indigenous youth to be given a voice, angry over how they were portrayed at a violent protest last week.
Aboriginal people have got a righteous anger in this country, and I think what White Australia should be respectful of is the fact that our protests have always been peaceful.
Police have charged 7 people over last week's riot.
The actions of that man on the day in Kalgoorlie needs to be accountable. There is a very obvious bias in our judicial system, despite the laws that govern us. WA Police themselves have their very own Charter of Multiculturalism, Chapter 11 of the Criminal Code, which makes any person who engages in any conduct other than in private that promotes or increases animosity towards or a harassment of a racial group as being guilty of a crime. How is it that this man is not even guilty of that crime?
More than 200 people remembered Elijah Doughty with a minute's silence at a peaceful rally in Perth today. The protest was in response to the death of the 14-year-old who was allegedly run down by a youth last week. Many in the community are calling for the accused's manslaughter charge to be upgraded to murder. The protest featured many Black Lives Matter signs, a smoking ceremony and a performance by rapper Budja. Liberal man Robert Eggington called out the West Australian government's response to last week's protests in Kalgoorlie.
The West Australian Attorney-General, Michael Mission, has commenced to lay charges of the young people in Kalgoorlie, who he says started race riots and in the streets of Kalgoorlie. He seems to have been more focused on the young response to the death than the killing itself.
Our final presenter is Robert Eggington, Director of the Dumbarton Aboriginal Corporation. Robert has been instrumental in many rallies, projects, international and national campaigns concerning intellectual property rights, and has been active in the Nyungar community for over 30 years. And we're going to hear a song called Kaya Kayana, written by Graham Dixon and performed by our nephew Joshua Fluent Eggington.
Listen to the stories as the elders are gaining and explain how your culture flourished before the Europeans came. Find why it's important, your strength must never wane. Nungas need the spiritual like dry land needs rain. See contemporary, traditional come together on stage. Guitars weeping, drummers thumping in angry's rage. Hurt, fear, frustration, escape the poet's cage while haunting digits echo deep from a forgotten age. Observe the women dancing, weaving to sing a song. History's mysteries from whence your soul belongs. Forget urban landscapes, go back to where you were strong. Search for hidden answers from which your spirit belongs. Hear rhythmic black performance cause vast crowds to sway. Soulful mesmeric lyrics put broken hearts on display. The words of hope and freedom offered a brand new day. As daylight kisses darkness, children laugh, dance and play. Kayana means to survive. Kaya Kayana, for which Nungas strive. Kaya Kayana, our culture on display. Kaya Kayana, celebrating indigenous way. Kaya Kayana, means to survive. Kaya Kayana, for which Nungas strive. Kaya Kayana, our culture on display. Kaya Kayana, celebrating indigenous way. May our campfires burn forever.
Burn forever. I looked out over the first Kayana gathering in 1991, when at the centre of the gathering, the corroboree, we had a burning flame which represented all of our people who had died inside custodial institutions across this country. And in looking at the flame, from my mouth came the words that for 30 years has been the maxim for Dumbarton and has become known right throughout this country: may our campfires burn forever. As I look out here today, this is a massive rally, and it's good to see that there's people of all different racial and cultural backgrounds here. It's good to see that the Black Lives Matter mob have turned up, the CFMEU, Murdoch University mob. We've got concern in our community, and we've got a righteous anger as Aboriginal people. But of course we are a people of great dignity. So here we are today to give tribute to all of our young people who have died at the hand of brutality and racism in this country. Rest in peace, and he's not buried as yet, young Elijah from Kalgoorlie. But let's not forget the death by those in uniform and badges of a young 16-year-old boy in Roban all those years ago, John Pat. Let us not forget young Cleon Jackman. You can't even describe the torture when he was locked away in a basement at Maddington and by 4 members of the Ku Klux Klan, was brutalised beyond the media being able to give description of what they did to his body. Rest in peace, our little brother. Let's not forget that young 11-year-old girl out there at the Maddington Primary School that had a whole can of pepper spray sprayed into her eyes because she had a little pair of plastic cutting scissors waving around in the air. A whole can of pepper spray. And let's not forget all of our young people who every night as they venture out from their homes, our son was one of them, would catch the train systems with the brutality and the monsters that guard the systems called Westrail Security. They brutalise our young people in this city every night of the week. Perth is the most racist city in the most racist country in the world. As our communities plunge into darkness and into chaos, I would like to give our respects to the great northern tribes of the Yamatji nations, the Waru and the Bardi peoples, the Warman peoples of Turkey Creek in the Kimberley, the Larrakia, the Warlpiri and the Yolngu people of the Northern Territories, the Binthi and the Wandle tribes of Cape York, and the Lardle people of the Gulf areas, the Kalkadoon peoples and the Murray nations of the East Coast, and the great Gadigal peoples of the Eora nations, the Palawa people of the island of Tasmania, the Yorta Yorta and the Kuris of the eastern southern lands, our brothers and our sisters of the great nations of the Nunga people, the owners of Uluru, the Pitjantjatjara, the Rante and the Gurindji peoples, and the great nations of the Wongai peoples of the Western Desert Block. Our spirit is one with you. We stand united on the lands of our ancestors and the ceremonial grounds of the oldest culture on the most ancient landmass on the earth. Today our hearts bleed with you. We become one in spirit and one in our struggle to resist and to stay alive against all the assimilative attacks to destroy our bloodlines and our identity. We have entered a spiritual warfare, the last bastion of genocide. Before all is lost, we have little time left to fail. I give my respects to all the mothers and the fathers who have lost their children and have fallen broken and bleeding, finding a way through the darkness and the most painful suffering that can ever be inflicted on life. In the special bonds of realism that connects the special enlightenment of surviving that loss, the healing is within our will to accept the strength that prevails, the wisdom that changes our hearts forever as it dies inside of our very existence of flesh and blood. We understand your pain and we are in your shadows. Our cultural and our spiritual experiences gives us signs when we as Aboriginal people are about to be moved to either accepting unseen warnings or the visions to prevent the inevitable. The split in the universe that reveals that fate will never be determined by the mind nor the heart. It is not for us to know. As the jitty jitty dances, death falls all around us. One of the hardest things in life for our young people is to simply stay alive. The infant mortality rate and adult mortality rate for the life of Aboriginal people in this country compared to non-Aboriginal people is its greatest shame. The privileged, affluent white lifestyles that are founded on the minerals below Aboriginal lands wreak the impoverished existence of our bloodlines that trace back to the great Jidda, the first dawn of time, as we, the Bibbulmun people, merged from the granite foundations of the great Prongerups, the oldest granite formation on the earth that pinnacled the earth's surface 1,000 million years ago. Our people were forcibly dispossessed and disinherited from our ancestral lands by means of genocide, and the most violent Holocaust ever vexed against the human race of people on this planet. We have come to know the white man's ways. We have come to know of his brutality, his racism, his hatred and bitterness. Most importantly, we have come to know his trickery, deceit and lies, his expectation that turns to treachery, like fool's gold. As the richest per square metre of land on the planet, the Golden Mile, the super pit, now lays like the grave site for all humanity, whilst white Australia turned away from the plight of the Wongai people as they entered the extreme impacts of genocide and death. Many crossed the song lines and the circumcision lines that separated our laws for entry into Noongar Budja. for needs such as health care and survival that now lay helpless in Wellington Square, in full sight from the windows of the State Health Department, the Department of Indigenous Affairs, the mental health officers, the Red Cross, the Save the Children institution, the Next Step alcohol and drug programs, and the Royal Perth Hospital, the Catholic Archdiocese office, and the Cathedral. Sleeping cold on the wet grass and the brick-paved pathways as they who walk past turn away from the despair and the destruction of the lives of these once great people. Our leadership is broken, fractured and nullified. Our people pursue the elite academic government-appointed positions that are appointed by government to ensure that their policies of death are strategically carried out against our people, as institutionalised racism is embedded into every bureaucracy of the government. These so-called leaders are and have a real common similarity of the old black tracker that were once used on the killing fields, that were afforded the king plates as conformist negotiators, while those in chains and shackles had pride in their eyes. The story has never changed and it remains the same. I'm sick of seeing our great Yonga kangaroo skin cloaks, our sacred burial robes being taken into Parliament House by Aboriginal members to impress the white politicians that show descriptions of symbols of sacred stories that they claim as their own, that belong to the Central and the Western Desert Aboriginal culture. This is a great shame on the theatrics of how our culture is treated by those who claim to be our spokespeople at national levels as they walk lost and futile around the corridors of the white man's greatest chamber of control of colonisation, Parliament House. Playing politics with their privileged elite of black academia appointment to endorse and implement the politics that destroy the lives of our people. They fly 30,000 feet above the problems of their people. They eat from 5-star menus in luxurious hotels with travel allowances that make the pensions of our people look like petty cash. They wallow in self-grandeur and applaud their worthlessness, self-centred ego, whilst our young are thrown into prisons and die at early ages. They seek the attention of the Australian media that is conservative, serving the interests of the rich and the powerful. The media creates deceit and pollutes the minds of people with their degradation of lies as they spin the dice against the human rights of Aboriginal people at every given chance. These same people attempt to create bonds of interest with journalists with no integrity or dignity. They flirt their filthiness to attract the attention of cheap media-covered politics and photo shots with ruthless journalists such as Andrew Bolt, Paul Murray, Alan Jones, and the many others. Aboriginal affairs in our country has become a lucrative business for many. We see our financial resources being allocated to non-Aboriginal agencies, sporting academies and church groups. It seems our resources are allocated everywhere other than in our community itself. This indicates that self-determination is low on the priority of the Indigenous advancement strategy of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. This leadership needs to be pulled down and destroyed forever. Tomorrow, the Royal Commission into the brutal treatment of our young people at the Dondale Centre commences. Ironic as each real-life experience somehow sends the last one into pale insignificance, we must show our young people that there are many of us who they can trust and respect. Not all have sold out and conformed to a moderate existence accepting the white man's gifts of subserviency. We are engaged in a continued secret war in this country, where we lose more of our young people to modern-day genocide at the hands of the colonial oppressors than Palestinian lives are lost in the Gaza Strip. However, the deaths of the young people in the Gaza Strip is covered by international worldwide media, whilst our young Aboriginal people die and hardly a whisper is raised. I heard an elder say, "I may be a woman, in grief of the loss of pain and suffering of my flesh and blood, land, religious belief systems, my language, my children have been stolen away. I have lost my humanity, and yet if this is as good as it can get, I will survive, with a smile that I know that I must put you down for a while." Our young people are restless, driven with a passion of change, street warriors that have learnt the hard way and give of life so easy, it reckons with the courage of the most devastating outcomes. Imagine turning to stone, there is no turning back, coming to a place of solace. It's all unheeded warnings, and they've got no navigation home. Across the skies, they see their shadows fly. They fight against the system that ruthlessly enforces assimilative attempts to capture their spirit in a world dominated by education and religious Christian beliefs. Manipulated by values and morals that corrupt wisdom, truth and decency, their screams are heard for the wisdom of our spirituality as our ceremonial ochre, our ancient paint, drips down from tiers of a grabby halo just above the heads of our elders as they say their last goodbyes. We have little time left to fail. My message to our young people today is that we must stay true to our cultural beliefs and our spirit and our old people's way of life. We must respect each other. Know you are from the most ancient peoples on this planet. Never surrender your birthright to our Budja, the land. Never become what they want us to believe we are, and know that the ones of us who seem to hate are the ones that love the most. When you are all alone in the great unknown, trust yourself. And never allow the final breath to be seen by the white man as giving up. And know that the white man's poison is killing us. We can run, we can walk, and we can crawl to freedom. However, we can never stagger to freedom. The great Palawa leader, Truganini, saw massive death and suffering as our homeland island was shattered with grief forever. As the soldiers cornered them, the shotgun blasts echoed across the southern oceans, and from the cliffs they fell bleeding into the great southern water. This is Dumbarton's last public rally. This is our last protest. This is our trail of tears, suffering and pain after 37 years in the cold-faced front lines of our community. I remember my first ever public speech was with the late Lenny Koolonger. We spoke about the then recent death of John Pat, a young 16-year-old from Roban, killed by police officers with badges and uniform. Today, it is with a respected rest in peace for young Elijah from Kalgoorlie, killed by a man in a fluorescent shirt. May you all keep our campfires burning forever.